This week, India is celebrating the auspicious Navratri, the 9 nights of the Hindu goddess Durga. While popular all over India, Durga is perhaps most fiercely beloved to Bengalis. The Bengali diaspora across the world has set up pandals to worship her for Navratri, and Bengali culture, music and cuisine are celebrated both within and outside these temporary temples. But where did the goddess Durga originate? How did she grow so beloved to Bengalis in particular? The answer takes us through nearly 2000 years of South Asian history, from Zoroastrian and Roman iconography in 2nd century Mathura through generations of warlike medieval kings and merchants to Mughal-ruled zamindars in early modern Bengal. As with many of South Asia's most popular gods today, it's not possible to pinpoint the exact beginnings of Durga. Fierce goddesses are present in the Vedas, the most ancient of our religious texts, but they aren't battle goddesses and buffalo slayers like Durga is. The earliest depictions of her in sculpture come from an entirely unexpected place, one of the major cities of the Central Asian Kushan Empire, Mathura, in the upper Gangetic Plains. In heroic Shāktism, the cult of Durga in ancient Indian kingship, historian Bihani Sarkar, who is perhaps the most interesting scholar of Durga today, writes that Kushan-ruled Mathura has yielded dozens of Durga statues, which is a concentration that's seen nowhere else in 1st to 2nd century South Asia. Intriguingly, these early depictions of Durga had a lot in common with the royal Kushan goddess Nana, who was a Zoroastrian deity whom the Kushans believed granted them kingship. Durga, like Nana, is depicted with the sun and the moon seated upon a lion. In some cases, she's shown killing a buffalo by grasping it from behind and cutting its throat, which is reminiscent of the Roman god Mithras, who was popular in the Mediterranean world at the time. So it seems that, like with other Hindu deities, the global contacts of the Kushans may have offered a rich visual canvas for devotees of Durga to draw from, as we talked about in this video. Now, over the next centuries, Durga's following grew steadily as various royal religions sought to absorb her. The worshippers of Vishnu considered her Nidramaya, a deity of sleep and death embodying the yogic sleep of Vishnu. But gradually, Shiva worship grew to become South Asia's dominant royal religion, like we talked about here. Now, in Shaivism, Durga was linked with the fierce aspects of Parvati, who was Shiva's consort. She was associated with battle, with the founding of cities and salvation from crises. Sanskrit hymns were composed praising her prowess in war and her extraordinary beauty. Professor Sarkar suggests that to newly emerging Shaivite states of the early medieval period, Durga represented civilization on its frontier with the anarchic, terrifying world of forest peoples, war, death and disease. Think of her as a medieval Indian analogue of Colombia or Marianne, the feminine representations of 19th century America and France respectively. But unlike Colombia and Marianne, Durga had an amazing ability to absorb diverse local goddesses beyond the pale of urban respectability, who represented, like she did, grit and blood, magic and divine favor, which medieval people believed held up society. From Stambheshwari, the deity of the Odisha hills, to Vindhyavasini, the dweller of the central Indian mountains, to Kotravai, the warrior maiden of the Tamil coast, all came to be associated with Durga. Now, throughout the medieval period, while kings routinely worshipped male gods with ever more refined and sanctified offerings, Durga was generally offered blood, flesh and heads, both animal and human. Sculptures and inscriptions from across South Asia attest to this. And it wasn't just kings and warriors that held her sacred. Even medieval Tamil merchants claimed to be beloved sons of the goddess Durga and named their towns after her. On the west coast, a 10th century Muslim port governor working for a Shaivite emperor patronized Durga, possibly holding her responsible for his naval victories. And for centuries, Durga was most importantly a goddess of battle and viscera, a role that she's substantially lost today. From the 12th century onwards, new modes of political power were violently established in the subcontinent. Generally speaking, this new Indian Muslim kingship legitimized itself through association with Sufi saints who claimed direct communion with the divine instead of giving offerings to the gods. And of course, Muslim kings were happy to attack old royal temples, some of which were associated with Durga. In fact, as the Delhi Sultanate was being established, at least some Hindu rulers buried their images of Durga, hoping that she would someday rise and help them overthrow the barbarians. But this iconoclastic attitude didn't hold true for all Indian Muslim kings. For example, as Sarkar writes in her paper, The Rite of Durga in Medieval Bengal, the 15th century Bengal Sultan Jalaluddin, who we talked about here, patronized the Brahmin Brihaspati Rayamukta, who composed Sanskrit texts on Hindu deities. Jalaluddin also deliberately used a lion motif on his coins because it appealed both to worshippers of Durga and to Persianate audiences. Now, since Durga could no longer be the premier royal war goddess in a sultanate-dominated world, Sanskrit texts from the 15th century stopped asking her for military success. Instead, they asked her for wealth, sons, fertility, and good harvests, reflecting the interests of a new kind of patron, the great Bengali landholders or zamindars. She was also praised increasingly as Annapurna, the goddess of endless rice. Across Bengal, according to Sarkar, Durga was worshipped in many forms with many local rites, but the zamindars' interpretation of her as the goddess of harvests and bounty proved most influential. The zamindars generally collaborated with the Mughal conquerors of Bengal who arrived there, led by the Rajput general Man Singh in the 16th century. But Durga offered them a route to insist on their proud traditions and link them to older local ideas of kingship. In a slightly later text, the Annadamangal of Bharatachandra, the invading Man Singh, impressed by various miracles, is initiated in the worship of Annapurna by a Brahmin zamindar. But the Mughal Emperor Jahangir scorns Annapurna and imprisons the Brahmin. The enraged Annapurna and her hordes of ghosts ransack the zananas and palaces of Mughal Delhi until Jahangir pleads for mercy. Pleased, she grants him a vision of all her Puranic exploits, at which point he worships her and enjoins the Muslims of Delhi to do so as well. Now, Mughal rule over Bengal eventually ended, but the zamindars endured into the colonial period, moving from the countryside into Kolkata and Dhaka. This was the latest and most recent step in Durga's evolution, as she now became a neighborhood goddess supported by local donations instead of royal largesse. Though now a benevolent mother more than a fierce warrior, Durga has outlasted innumerable empires and will probably outlive us all. If you have questions or comments, we'd love to hear them. Follow us everywhere on social media. You can find me on Instagram at Buddha and on Twitter at Ekaniseti. We'll see you next week.